The day Colton Mercer walked into the Harborview Grand and saw his wife mopping the lobby floor, he didn't recognize her at first. That was the part that stayed with him. Not the shock of finding her. Not the months of searching, the private investigators, the sleepless nights staring at her side of the bed. What stayed with him, what would keep him up for years afterward, was the 3 seconds he spent looking straight at her, and seeing nothing but a woman in a blue uniform doing her job. 3 seconds. Then her head tilted slightly, the way it always did when she was concentrating, and his whole world collapsed. Her name was Serena Mercer. Serena Voss before she married him 6 years ago. And she was mopping the marble floor of a 5-star hotel lobby in downtown Seattle while 8 months pregnant with his child. Colton Mercer had built Mercer Capital from a single office in Bellevue into one of the Pacific Northwest's most recognized private equity firms. He was 41 years old, wore the same kind of charcoal suit 5 days a week, and had the reputation of a man who solved problems quickly and without sentiment. His employees respected him. His competitors feared him a little. His mother, Constance Mercer, had opinions about all of it. Constance had opinions about everything. She had opinions about the neighborhood Colton bought his first house in. She had opinions about the color of the upholstery in his office. She had very strong opinions about the woman he brought home one Sunday afternoon in the spring of 2018, and introduced as the woman he intended to marry. Serena was a graphic designer from Portland. She had a small studio apartment, a second-hand car, and a laugh that made a room feel lighter. She was warm and funny and quietly confident in a way that Colton found steadying. He had been around ambitious people his whole life. Serena was the first person who seemed genuinely content. Constance saw something else entirely. "She's not what I pictured for you," she told Colton the night after she met Serena. They were standing in the kitchen of her home in Medina, the house Colton's father had built, and that Constance had treated like a monument ever since he died. "She's pleasant enough, but pleasant isn't a foundation. I'm not asking for your architectural assessment, Mom. I'm just saying, you have a certain kind of life, a certain kind of expectation. She'll struggle with that." Colton didn't argue with her. He had learned over 40 years that arguing with Constance Mercer was less like a disagreement, and more like trying to redirect a river with your hands. He just smiled and changed the subject and went home and proposed to Serena the following weekend. They were married that September in a small ceremony on the Oregon coast. Constance sat in the front row in a pale blue dress and smiled tightly through the whole thing. For the first 2 years, things were good, better than good, in the honest moments when Colton let himself admit it. Serena had started freelancing from home after they moved into the house in Madison Park, and she'd built up a client list that kept her busy and satisfied. She made friends with the neighbors. She planted things in the backyard, tomatoes, herbs, flowers whose names he could never remember. She was in all the ways that actually mattered happy. Constance started coming by more. It began with Sunday dinners, then Sunday dinners and Tuesday lunches, then Tuesday lunches and the occasional Wednesday afternoon, when she happened to be in the neighborhood and thought she'd stop in. Colton was usually at the office. That was the thing he would spend the most time regretting later. He was usually at the office. He didn't hear the comments Constance made when he wasn't there. He only heard Serena's version later, quietly, at the end of the day. And by then he had already convinced himself that his mother didn't mean the things she said the way Serena heard them. "She told me the dining room looked like a college rental. She's just old-fashioned about decorating. Colton, she said it in front of the woman who does our cleaning. He stopped. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'll talk to her." He didn't talk to her. Or rather he did. A soft hedging conversation that changed nothing and satisfied no one. Constance left the call with the impression that her son was on her side. Serena, watching his face when he hung up, had probably understood something different. He told himself it would get easier. People adjusted. Families found their rhythms. He had too much going on at work to spend energy on something that would sort itself out. That was the version of events he told himself. For a long time he believed it. Serena found out she was pregnant in February. She told him on a Thursday evening, standing in their kitchen with a look on her face that was equal parts joy and something else he couldn't quite name then. He lifted her off the ground. He kissed her face twice. He told her it was the best thing she'd ever said to him. For about 2 weeks everything felt reset. Then Constance found out. She came over the following Sunday with a bottle of sparkling cider and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and sat across from Serena at the kitchen table and said, "Well, this changes the timeline, doesn't it?" Colton was at the counter. "What timeline?" "I've been speaking with the Harrington family. Their daughter Paige is a partner at a law firm now. Lovely girl. Obviously that conversation is closed now." She lifted her glass. "Congratulations." He saw Serena's face. The small, careful stillness that had become her expression in rooms where Constance was present. Like she was deciding, moment by moment, how much energy it was worth spending to respond. "Mom," he said, "I'm happy." Constance said, "Genuinely, a grandchild is wonderful. I just think we all need to be practical about what this means going forward. Colton, you'll want to get the estate documents updated, And Serena, you'll want to stop taking on new clients. Better to wrap that up now than in 6 months. She can decide that herself, Colton said. Of course she can. Constance smiled at Serena. I'm only trying to be helpful. That night after his mother left, Serena sat on the edge of their bed for a long time without saying anything. Colton sat beside her. He took her hand. She doesn't mean it like it sounds, he said. He heard it even as he said it, the exhaustion in his own voice, the way the words had worn thin from overuse. Serena looked at him for a moment. Then she said very quietly, I know you believe that. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. She was gone on a Tuesday in April. He came home from the office at 7:15 to an empty house. Her coat was gone, her phone was on the kitchen counter. She had left no note, no message, nothing. Just a small potted succulent on the windowsill that she had always overwatered, and that for some reason was the thing he couldn't stop looking at. He called her sister in Portland. He called her 2 closest friends. He drove to places she liked. The bookstore on Capitol Hill, the waterfront, the small cafe near the park where she sometimes went to work. He called her phone from his car, knowing it was pointless, listening to it ring in the empty kitchen through the walls of his own house. By midnight he had called the police. They were careful and thorough and made it clear, very gently, that the circumstances didn't suggest an emergency. Her things were not fully gone. There was no sign of struggle. She was a grown adult with every legal right to leave. He understood that. What he couldn't explain to them was the particular quality of wrongness he felt. Not panic exactly. Something older and heavier. The feeling of a man realizing he had been ignoring the weather for so long he hadn't noticed when the storm actually arrived. Constance came over the next morning. She sat at the kitchen table and held his hand and said she was sorry. And for a moment she seemed genuinely shaken. Then she said, You know, I never wanted to say this, but I did wonder sometimes if she was fully committed to this life. To what you've built. He looked at her. I'm just saying, Colton. You're not responsible for what other people choose. He stood up from the table and walked out of the kitchen and didn't come back until she had let herself out. The next 4 months were a specific kind of quiet that had nothing peaceful in it. He hired 2 private investigators. He went through every account, every document, every digital record he could legally access. He drove to Portland twice, and walked through her old neighborhood asking questions that people answered with cautious sympathy. He sat through a dinner with his attorney and updated the estate documents anyway, because his attorney told him he should, and because doing something concrete felt better than doing nothing. He didn't sleep well. He ate badly. He lost weight he hadn't had to spare. His assistant, a capable young woman named Bree who had worked for him for 4 years, started leaving sandwiches on his desk without comment. The investigators found nothing for a long time. Then one of them, a former Seattle PD detective named Phil Okafor, methodical and unshowy, sent him a text on a Wednesday afternoon in August with 4 words, I think I found her. The address was a residential hotel in the Belltown neighborhood that had started renting rooms by the month during the pandemic, and never fully converted back. The name on the registry didn't match. The photograph Phil had taken from across the street was blurry and partial, a woman in a gray hoodie getting into a rideshare, but something in the shape of her, the way she held her shoulder bag, he knew. He knew before he could have said why. He asked Phil to keep watching, just for a day. He needed to know she was safe before he did anything else. The call came the next evening. Phil had been following her routine. She took the 7:15 rideshare every morning to a hotel downtown, the Harborview Grand. She was working there, housekeeping. He sat with that for a long time. His wife, who had a degree in visual communications, who had redesigned the branding for 3 regional nonprofits, who color-coded her calendar and read 2 books a month and cried at nature documentaries, was cleaning hotel rooms for $9 over minimum wage while carrying their baby. He went through every emotion in some order he couldn't reconstruct afterward. Guilt was the first one he could name clearly. Then anger. Not at her, though he tried to be angry at her and found he couldn't sustain it, but at himself, at the months of softened conversations and deliberate blindness, at the specific cowardice of a man who knew something was wrong, and kept choosing the version of events that required less of him. He thought about what she must have gone through to make this choice. To decide that disappearing to a residential hotel in Belltown, and mopping floors for $8 more than minimum wage, was a better option than staying. He thought about the look on her face the night he'd said she doesn't mean it like it sounds, and the way she'd said I know you believe that, and how he had been too relieved by her quiet acceptance, to hear what she was actually telling him.
He killed Phil.
And told him he was handling it himself from here. Then he got in his car and drove to the Harborview Grand. He didn't have a plan. That was probably evident to anyone watching, though he hoped no one was watching. He walked into the hotel lobby in his work clothes at 11:15 on a Friday morning, and stood near the front desk pretending to look at his phone and waited. She came around the corner 20 minutes later. She was pushing a housekeeping cart with one hand, and had the other pressed against the small of her back. Her hair was pulled up under a cap. She was wearing the hotel's standard blue uniform, and the front of it pulled across her stomach in a way that stopped him where he stood. 8 months. She was 8 months along. He watched her for those 3 seconds, 3 full seconds, and processed none of it. His brain offered him nothing. She was just a woman in a uniform doing her job, and the lobby was busy, and there was no reason to look twice. Then she tilted her head to check something on her cart, the small leftward tilt she always made when she was reading something carefully, and his chest simply caved in. He crossed the lobby in under 10 seconds. He stopped just behind her cart. He said her name. She went very still. Serena. She didn't turn around immediately. He watched her shoulders rise and fall once, slowly, like she was gathering herself. Then she turned. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes went through several things he couldn't fully read. Surprise, something guarded, something that might have been relief or might have been its opposite. "Colton," she said. Her voice was completely level. That was somehow the thing that hit him hardest. "Are you?" he started. "Are you okay? Are you both okay?" "We're fine, Serena, I've been." He stopped. The lobby was not a private space. There were guests and staff and a man in a polo shirt near the elevator who kept glancing over. "Can we talk somewhere, please?" She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked down at her cart and back at him and said, very quietly, "Give me 10 minutes. There was a break room on the 3rd floor. He didn't ask how she'd gotten them access. Just followed her through a staff corridor that smelled like industrial cleaner, and came out into a small room with a round table, and plastic chairs and a coffee maker that looked older than either of them. He sat across from her. He looked at her face. There were small changes in it that 4 months had made. Most of them around the eyes. She looked tired. She also looked, in some way he couldn't name exactly, more herself than he had seen her in a long time. "I looked everywhere for you," he said. "I know you did. Phil Okafor isn't as subtle as he thinks he is." He almost laughed. The almost law turned into something that caught in his throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" He heard how that sounded as soon as it left his mouth. He held up a hand. I know why I just." He stopped again. "I want to hear it from you. I want to actually hear it this time, if that's okay." She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "I left because I was tired of watching you choose her." He didn't say anything. "Not because you don't love me, I think you do. But every time it came to it, every time I needed you to stand in a room and just be on my side, you found a reason not to. You'd say something to her and it would be so careful, so calibrated, and she would leave feeling like she'd won and I would feel like I'd imagined the whole thing." She paused. "I was pregnant. I was sitting across from a woman who had made it clear she thought I was a mistake your son had made. And every time I looked at you for help, you were explaining her." He said nothing. "And I realized that was just." She pressed her lips together. "That was just what it was going to be. That was the life. And I couldn't raise a child inside that. I couldn't." She put her hand on her stomach without seeming to realize she'd done it. "So I left." Colton sat there and let all of that land exactly where it deserved to. He had spent 4 months building a case in his head for why this wasn't his fault. He had rehearsed arguments about what she could have said, what she could have asked for, what any reasonable person would have done differently. He had a whole architecture of justification, and it collapsed now, quietly, without drama, in a break room on the 3rd floor of a hotel where his wife was working for minimum wage to avoid coming home to him. "I chose wrong," he said, "every time. I knew what she was doing and I made it easier for her because confronting her was harder than watching you deal with it. That's not an explanation. It's just what happened." Serena looked at him. "I'm not asking you to come back today," he said. "I'm not going to sit here and promise things and expect you to feel better about them because I said them. I just needed you to know I understand it. Finally and actually." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the door the hotel went on being a hotel. Carts rolling, phones ringing, the distant chime of an elevator. "What would different look like?" she said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a real question. "It would look like me going home tonight and calling my mother and having the conversation I should have had 3 years ago. Not a careful version of it, the real one." He looked at her. "And then whatever she does with that is her business. But it doesn't affect you anymore. That's done." Serena looked at the table, then at him. "Colton. She's not going to take that well. I know. She'll make it very difficult. I know that too." She was quiet for another moment. The coffee maker behind her clicked and hummed. "The baby's due in 6 weeks," she said. "I know. Phil told me the due date." Something shifted in her expression, the smallest softening at the corners of her eyes. "Of course he did. I would really like to be there for that." He held her gaze. "I know I have to earn that. I'm not expecting it to be automatic. I'm just telling you what I want." She looked at him for a long time. He didn't fill the silence. He had spent 4 months filling silences with the wrong things. He could afford to wait. "My lease is month to month," she finally said. "I'm not going anywhere until we've actually talked. Not just tonight. Really takes," he said. She nodded once, slowly. They sat there in the break room for another few minutes, not quite talking, not quite not. Outside Seattle went about its Friday. Somewhere in the hotel a cartwheel squeaked down a corridor and a door closed and a phone rang twice and stopped. He made the call to Constance that evening. standing in the kitchen of the house in Madison Park that felt hollow without Serena's things in it. Constance answered on the second ring and he could hear the particular alertness in her voice. The way she always picked up his calls, like she was braced for good news and preparing for bad. He said, "I found Serena." A pause. "Well, that's a relief. She's been working at a hotel downtown, housekeeping. She left because she didn't feel safe in her own marriage, Mom. She didn't feel like I was on her side." Another pause, longer this time. "Colton, I hope you know I was only ever trying to. I know what you were trying to do. I'm not calling to argue about your intentions." He leaned against the counter and looked at the succulent on the windowsill. "I'm calling to tell you that this is going to be different. The way you speak to her, the way you show up to our home, the way you treat this marriage, all of it is going to be different. And if it isn't, you won't be in our lives, not mine and not our child's." The silence on the line was a kind that he had never heard from his mother before. Not anger, not argument. Something more fragile. "That's a very serious thing to say," she finally said. "I know it is, I mean it." She was quiet for a moment. He didn't try to cushion it. "I love you," she said finally, smaller than usual. "I just never thought she was right for. She's my wife, she's the mother of my child. That's not a debate I'm having anymore." He waited a beat. "I love you too, Mom, but this is where the line is." He hung up before she could respond. He stood in the kitchen for a while. The refrigerator hummed. The city made its usual sounds through the window. He drove back to the Harborview Grand at 8 o'clock. He texted Serena from the parking garage. "I made the call. I'm outside if you want to talk more. No pressure." She replied 4 minutes later. "Give me a few minutes." He sat in the car and waited. He was good at waiting when it actually mattered. He just hadn't known until recently which things actually mattered. When she came through the lobby doors at 8:20, she was still in the blue uniform, her bag over her shoulder, her hand pressed again to the small of her back. She looked tired and real, and exactly like the person he should have been fighting for all along. She got in the passenger seat. He didn't start the car right away. "How did it go?" she asked. "Exactly how I expected it to," he said. She wasn't happy, and that's okay, he said. "It should have been okay a long time ago." Serena looked at him, he looked at her. Outside, the Friday night traffic moved past, and somewhere above them the Harborview Grand went on, its lights lit, its floors clean, its guests unknowing. She put her hand over his on the console. He turned his over and held it. "Take me somewhere to eat," she said. "I'm starving," and the break room had nothing but vending machine crackers. He laughed, a real one, the first in a long time. He started the car. "Anywhere you want," he said. "Don't say that. I'll pick somewhere embarrassingly expensive." "Good," he said. "You've earned it." She didn't answer. But when he glanced over at the first red light, she was looking out the passenger window with the smallest, most careful smile. The kind she had when she was trying not to let it show, and it showed anyway. He kept driving. For the first time in 4 months, he had somewhere to be.